Documenting, organizing, and setting up things is key in order to keep things tidy, um, compartmentalized, and easy to refer back to if we're trying to open things back up and fix them. So the big thing is, now that I have my rig chosen, downloaded, and entered into Maya, the first thing that I'm going to do, which I've already done, and I'm going to show you, is pretty much making your project file or your window. And if you go to project window, this will come up. And as you can see, I've already made a project here. I renamed it. First it was LunaKick 3P, but I pretty much turned it into LunaKick 3 Suite. And all the default stuff folders come in for you. And then as you hit accept, it will create that folder for you. If you already have a folder set up, you can also go to set project. And by doing that on my desktop, I pretty much clicked on Luna Attack, and it should be able to do that for you. So that way, whenever you go back to set project, you should have it already in there. So cool. So big thing is right now, since we have our rig, we have to set up two views of this. First is the third person as well as the first person. So we're going to be setting this rig up two ways. And since I already have this rig opened, I'm showing you my three-piece setup. When working with any rig, it's important to actually test out this rig and see what exactly comes with it, how is it set up. I normally look for a few things. One, is this FK-IK compatible, which a lot of rigs in the past few years come standard default, which is great. Two, do they have offsetting and manual finger controls, which they do, provided by these pins. There's a lot of and if you right click and go to poly surface, you can not select poly surfaces, but actually the control objects themselves. There's a lot of rigs that come standard with attribute default shapes, such as over here, fist, relax, spread, all that stuff. And they're okay if there's something that you need to put in a quick pose or anything like that for the hands, but I much prefer and highly recommend individual controls for the fingers, because when doing first person, it's essential that you have the right pose, complete control over all the fingers in order to get the right kind of design you want. So with that too, I also check to see if they have world space, which they do. In this rig in particular, it's highlighted by T. There is IK-FK switching, which is a plus, and also body arm space switching, which is great too. My default setup for especially a 3P character is I stick with IK legs. So that way when I'm moving my core around, she doesn't go through the ground, as I don't need her to do that. But also I like to work with FK arms as well. But once we get to the weapon, I'll show the switch that I do for IK in order to have better control of the weapon. So with this selected, what I want to do is I want to make sure I have certain body parts that are in world space that don't function control over what the head and the arms are doing. And the only thing that I do want to check is to make sure that the arms are in world space as well as the head. And what I mean by that is I've already switched the head, but I'll switch it back just to show. So once the head and or neck is locked to chest or body space, whenever you rotate, so will the head. It's like an FK throughout the entire body. But we don't want to do that, or at least I don't. I don't like to use that just because moving the chest around independent from the head position. So what I do is, going back to this control here, is I switch the neck into world space as well as the head. So that way when I do rotate around, let me take these controls over, the head stays firmly in the same position, which is great. But it's not affected by the waist control. The waist still has control over the body, but also bending too, which follows with it as a plus. So it's not completely in world space, thank God. Another thing which is pretty cool as well, I like to have a default pose on this, and as you can see, I'm utilizing Anibot tools. And Anibot tool is really cool because it gives you a total reset of the pose that you're actually looking for. I will pose the character in a default position. So starting with this one, I'll put the hands to the side, put some separation in the feet, as well as the foot positioning. And then by using the FK finger controls, I will give her a default resting hand position on both sides. And then when you do this and select everything, Anibot has a cool feature that if you do snapshot preferred default pose, Maya essentially in the scene is going to take a default shot of everything that you have selected here, and this will be your default minus pose. I also use reference rigs into my scene as well. So it says default pose snapshot complete. I think it also works with reference rigs. That's probably why it gave me the warning. But the cool thing about this is by doing this, and say like if I'm trying to mix and match whatever pose going back, if I want to go back to my default pose, all I do is just zero out my pose and it goes back to the snapshot that I gave it. So as you see, the default pose is selected here with its rotation Z at 73. And if I make any adjustment to it, I also have what's called a reset pose, which is reset, translation, rotation, and scale. And I've linked it to my number 2 hotkey. And this is really good for in case I'm working with FK or over rotating, double rotating into another pose. I can just quickly reset to default to keep my animation in check, to keep my stuff grounded and prevent double rotations or gimbal lock as well. So that's a really good handy tool that I have before even starting. So this is my default 3P Luna setup, and what I'm going to do is just save a new file in this scene to show me exactly what I'm looking at. So right now it's NC11 woman, and what I'm going to do is, since I've given her a name, I'm just going to put Luna 3P rig. Great. Okay, and with that saved, now I'm going to be moving on to the 1P rig. So this is essentially the same rig, but for 1P animations, first person animations, we have to make adjustments. And to do that correctly, there's going to be a little bit of tweaking to do to the model, but nothing too seriously, fortunately. The one big thing that, especially all the rigs that we worked on in Overwatch, a rig consists of a camera that's parented to the head, that's looking straight forward, and the only thing that is visible on the model itself will be the arms and hands. But in this case, what we are doing is we're animating a kick from Luna. We are animating a spin kick as she's holding a weapon. So the only thing that we will be erasing or hiding from the scene is pretty much her upper torso, maybe her pelvis as well, but also keep the legs intact as well. So the only thing we'll be seeing of this 1P rig is her arms and her legs. So now in order to do that, what I'd like to do is, there's two things that I do. But one, if you have a special tool for stuff like this, all it essentially asks and requires for is selecting polygons and putting them on hiding layers. Now, if you just select any polygon, you can do this a couple of ways. One is you can create a display layer, which will hide whatever polygons you select. But this can be a little tedious. So what I like to do is I'll just take it and paint it and put a material on top of it. What you can also do is, if there's like a set hider tool that you can use and select, there's one that I really like called FCM Hider, created in scene, and this basically just tells me each and every part that I want to hide, and it acts so much as a layer, but there's big buttons that you could turn things on and off. But suppose you didn't have this one, or don't have a proper tool hider, I can also show you my intent, something else that could help as well. So not using this tool, very stick to basics. What I do like to do is like right click, assign new material, and this will take us to our Hypershade. And what you can do here is just assign a simple material. Let's just go with a Lambert because it's very straightforward. And we want to name this Lambert, so that way we can reverberate back to it. We can know what it is, and that we're just going to call this Hide Geo layer. And by doing that, the great thing about it is you just take the transparency and just crank it way up. So that way we can hide the material that's here. So also what we're going to do is we're going to do a couple of things here. We're essentially just going to go through and take whatever material that we need in order to hide her geo. So what I'm going to do is also grab this one, and what you want to do is just go to your renders editors and go to Hypershade. And Hypershade is going to pull up all the materials that you made, and in here you're going to be able to find the hidden material that we just made. So looking through all this stuff, there's hidden geo. Obviously it's hard to see because it's hidden. And what we're going to do is just basically use this here and start selecting some geo. Right click, assign to material. So now we'll start hiding things. And once we get to here, this is where we're going to start to do a little bit of painting. Because it's essentially we're going to be needing to find just the faces of the geometry in order to hide. So doing that, what you can do is just go to right click, select faces, and you could use the paint tool for this as well too. I kind of double click on this, expand the radius a little bit so that way your geo comes up straight, and we're just going to take our time. And what I'm going to do is, yeah, I want to make sure that I'm able to see all the geo because they're very, very light when it comes to selecting and highlighting and making sure that I have everything. So I'm just going to take my time here and paint over all this stuff. I think one thing that you can do is just grab a whole mess of stuff here. Let's just go to right click, assign material. Great. Let me select all this material here too. Right click, assign. Cool. And now right here, this is where we have to be extremely picky. And also too here, let's see. I want to get rid of this jacket, but obviously the hidden part is there. So let me select this jacket. Let me go back and select this jacket, and I'm going to put this on a layer and hide this as well. So that should be hidden. Okay, great. And now I'm going to go back, select our faces, grab our paint tool, and just slowly but surely try to get around the arms. Okay, so coming back to it, we did our part and selected all the faces. Now we're just going to double check to make sure that we haven't lost anything. This looks pretty good, and then we just want to get rid of the last little pieces of eye and face geometry, so we're going to hide that as well. Oops. Just the parts that we might need. Just want to be sure we deselect all the stuff that we're not hiding. So face and eyes as well. There we go. And this is essentially everything that we're looking for as far as a first-person shooter goes. You just want the arms and the legs. I mean, normally we just do just the arms, but making sure the rig is still there. But in this case, since we're doing the kick, we include the legs as well. So let's close this tool. We don't need that, and we don't need our hidden tool anymore, which is great. And what we're going to do too here is we're going to add a camera to the top rig. Fortunately, the rig is still there. As we select it, it's able to move, which is great. And what we're going to do is, just for reference, we're going to just do this in this scene, but we'll add it in another scene later. I'm just going to make a polyplane. So I'm going to go to modeling, and all I'm going to do is just make first off a cube, and I'm just going to throw this guy up in front, our hero, and just duplicate this 2 times, so that way I have something to look in the front that shows me dimension in the space that I'm going to be looking at, and also just make a polyplane just to kind of compensate for the spacing in between the two dimensions. And then I'm going to create a camera. So just create any camera. Camera's fine. And then we're just going to name this guy FPS camera. And this is what we're going to be utilizing for the camera for her head we're going to be animating to, and scale that sucker way up. Not too big. I mean, you can go as big as you want, really, just to kind of have something to grab onto. And what we're going to do is we're going to snap this to the head that itself. And I think it's just because we have the camera selected, we're going to select the head control, and then go down to these little Anibot controls over here. And then we're going to go to Align Object right here. Click this guy. And this will snap the camera to the control exactly how it should be. And right now we're going to face the camera the other way because she's not looking backwards. So we're going to click a 180 right here. And just for reference, we're going to look through the camera to see what we're working with right now. All right. Coolly cool. And then we're going to put a film gate here to give us the exact film gate of what we will be seeing. And from here, what I like to do is just kind of get a little preview of how far the arms are going to be in front of our character. So I'm just going to move the arms in front here, and then also mirror the other arm here. And mirror this one as well. So this is essentially what we're going to be looking at. And right now it looks pretty good. The big thing that we're going to do is we don't want the camera to be too high. What we can do is just lower it just a tad, just a bit more. And then from there, what we can do is mess with the film gate as well. I'm sorry, the focal length. So the focal length right now is at 35. And I think what we do, we tend to use like a 25, 26, 27, just to kind of give more space to what the character is doing, what it's looking at. And this could be adjusted later, but just for a default purposes, let's break even. Let's just go 26 because that feels pretty good. Okay, and then from there, what we do is now that our hands are giving us the information that we want to, we're just going to zero back out the hands. So then from there, what we're going to do is we're going to parent this camera, hard parent, to the head control. So grabbing the head control object first and the camera, we're going to constrain this sucker. So going to constraints through animation, we go to constrain and just make sure that our parent constraint is here. Double check on the reset box, reset, maintain, offset, add and apply. So that way when we move our head control, our camera moves with it. So looking at it through first person, as we move down and up, this is essentially going to be our new head control, just looking at it from the front. And just to double check that again, we're going to bring our hands up. Yep, looks cool. Just going back to our camera. Yep, our focal length is at 26. That's cool. Yeah, just making sure that we don't touch this at all. We don't want to touch this. But our head control, zeroing this out, moving this down. Yep, looks like everything's pretty good. And that's essentially what we want to have. So in order not to touch any of this stuff, what I want to do is I want to make sure that my camera is locked. And that way we don't mess up our camera and our focal length by accident. Sometimes it's best to just hide the visibility so you don't accidentally touch it. Or you can essentially just tell your panel control just not to touch cameras at all. So that way I won't be able to select it by accident. So that's all good. And what we're going to do is we're going to zero everything out and delete this stage that we made. And then we're going to save this rig as Luna's first person. So go to save rig. We have Luna 3P. Now we have Luna 1P. So now with these two rigs set up, we're going to set up our scenes with weapon in hand and constraint pass. So follow me along as I do this. We start a brand new scene. Now, with a brand new scene, we're going to start with pretty much the 1P standard setup. So what I like to do is reference all my rigs in, because instead of accidentally deleting them, referencing keeps them in from the original source, which is always a safe bet to start any scene. So looking into this, I'm going to look to Luna 1P. Awesome. So now what I'm going to do is open up my right screen to be first person. And what I want to do is essentially set up the same scene that I had when I made this rig to begin with. And that includes a ground plane and also some squares. And how we did it in Overwatch or any kind of first-person shooter is we made essentially 9 blocks, 3 across, 3 to the top. So it looked something like this. And this just kind of gave us dimension, some 3D space to see what exactly our character is doing within this space to give some perspective. So great. So getting all that, I'm going to select all this stuff. I'm going to put it on a layer and lock it so I don't have to worry about accidentally touching it. And renaming this, I'm just going to call this BG, like background or environment, but BG's fine. Give it a color, set it, and forget it. Great. Oh, and now that I'm looking at this now, I think it would be a good idea to get rid of these facial controls because they're in the way. Only look at the controls that we need, and we can do that by selecting visibility. But I think facial stuff is what we're looking for. So yeah, brow controls off. Let's just grab all this stuff right here and turn these guys off because we don't need any of these facial controls. Cool. How does it look from the front? Okay, nice and clean. Great. Cool. So what we're going to do now is bring in our weapon, which is the AK-47. And of course, go to create reference again. And then we're navigating in our folder to our AK-47 rig, which is in here. Of course, the beta. And it comes in really, really small, but that's okay. So grabbing this control here, this is the main control. And of course, we're going to globally scale this up because we want it big to match her. Too big. I'm going to just try for a safe bet, maybe go around 4.7. We could always keep updating it. And this rig we haven't taken a look at, but it's pretty standard, pretty good. It's got 2 master controls. Let's just hide this. It's got 2 master controls, one on the hilt, the other on the helm, and I think one last one here on the handle. And we're going to be using this ultimately. So let's bring this one up, kind of like inner field of view. Bring up both our scenes, our BGs back. And then this is where we have to do a little bit of posing, for our character. And one big thing before I start anything is the way that we're going to have to rig this guy to constrain this weapon to Luna's hands. And one big thing that I know that I'm going to want to do is the way that I'm going to rig this is have one arm drive the gun. So as I set this up here, I'm going to just kind of get in perspective how far my arm is going to come out. and just check through camera view to see what I'm looking at. So let's just get a feel. Let's put our arms back in perspective again to see how far in we're getting this. And this is when I start posing out my idle. And then just for kind of reference, the rough drawing that we did, we're going to be utilizing this as kind of our reference. Pose-wise, so we're going to be driving this gun to look at exactly what we're looking in frame. So one good cool thing is that normally we'll just start kind of like with the side of the weapon, how the weapon's going to look in frame. And so we're just going to roughly stick that guy in here. And then with that, we're just going to bring this to the side a little bit and then see if we can match this hand to the gun. So I would suggest to change the left hand and essentially the right hand to IK. And to kind of do like something a little bit quick, I'm going to grab this IK hand. I'm going to grab the IK hand and I'm going to grab the handle, the gun, and then do our little snap tool here. And with our IK elbow, pointing this one out to the side too as well. Let's just for time's sake put this guy on a layer. We'll just put hand pose, hand control. Because a lot of the stuff that I try to do, I try to delete the visual clutter to see exactly what I'm working with when it comes to these hand poses. And just to make sure I'm grabbing all the controls that seems to be right, great. We're starting from the thumbs backwards, and we want to make a nice firm grip with the thumb, with the hand wrapped around the weapon. And also to know that these clavicles can also be pushed and rotated as well. So we want to make sure that our IK hand fits firmly around the grip of the weapon. So this is feeling fine. We want to make sure that we save this file as our work continues, but we want to save this and name it properly. So through this Luna Attack Suite, we want to have it in our scenes folder, and then we'll name this Luna 1P Attack. Great. So with this, we want to make sure that this is driving the weapon. So coming back here, we want to select the overall hand that's going to be controlling the object, and we're just going to parent that to the hilt of the gun. So by grabbing this guy first and grabbing this other one, we'll just go to a parent constraint, check our box, make sure everything is reset. As always, maintain offset, and then go to add. Double check to make sure our constraint works. It does. Really great. And now also what we want to do too is we want to make sure that the hips are driving the IK hand, which they're currently not. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to our spacing and going back to the IK right hand and switching that to root. So that way this moves correctly. Awesome. For the left hand, we are going to have to constrain this to the weapon, but in a very special way in order to manipulate this correctly and have the hand work around the weapon. We're going to do a special reverse parent constraint in order to give us the proper setup. So what I'm going to do with the left hand is I want to make sure that it's not going to be manipulated by anything. And the parent spacing is essentially going to be switched to world. So that way we double check and the hand should not be influenced or moved by anything, which it is not. And that's great. So what we want to do, setting up our first person view with the gun, looks pretty cool. We are going to start working on our parent constraint. And to do this reverse locator restraint, or to do this reverse IK constraint, we're first going to have to create a locator. And with that locator selected, we are going to shift select the IK and use our pink snap tool to snap it exactly where we want it. And now with the locator snapped correctly to the IK, we're going to scale it up a bit to see where we're at. And what we're going to do is open up our Windows outliner, find where exactly our locator is, and we want to name this correctly, otherwise it can be confusing. So what we're going to do is name this basically a left-hand constraint. Or better yet, left constraint hand. Okay, and now with this renamed, what we're going to do is, since we have moved this locator in space, we want to make sure that all these controls are zeroed out. And to do that, we're going to hit Modify, Freeze Transformations. Now this is going to reset the scale, but all we have to do is just scale it back up to see exactly where the constraint's at. Great. Now from here, what we're going to do is we're going to make the new left-hand IK controller, the substitute for what's already here. So what we're going to do is grab this constraint hand that we've already made, duplicate this, and rename this new duplicate left hand control. Left hand control. Great. Now this will be the new control that will be driving our hand. And the way to do that, first off, it's important to know that this will be the new left hand IK control, as we'll be parenting the IK that's connected to the rig to the weapon while having these two constraint hands controlling the IK. And I know that might sound confusing, but bear with me, I'll show you how it's done. So before we do anything, it's important to have this left hand control manageable and selectable. So what I like to do, and there could be another way as well, is if you have the Anibot tools, which I highly suggest, is opening up these quick selects and making a quick select for the hand control, as we'll make quick select sets for all these controls eventually. So what to do is basically keep it the same as you named it before. It already puts the name correctly. Choose a color, and now we have a left hand control that we want. Or if you want to, what you can do is you can scale down the constraint and just use the locator as the left hand control to do that as well. But what we want to do is basically make a child of the constraint hand that we've made too. And it's confusing when you're working on constraint parents, but it's more helpful to do this manually by just simply middle click dragging the hand control into the constraint. And now the left hand control is a child of the constraint hand, and this is great. So now what we're going to do is we are going to release the control of the IK rig to the control of our new left hand control. And by doing that, the selection set goes like this. We're going to select our new hand left hand control, and then we are going to select our IK control on Luna's initial rig, and we're going to parent constraint that. So check box, make sure everything's reset again, just to double check, add. So now what we have is our new left hand control will be controlling Luna's arm. And on top of that, since it's a child of the constraint hand, this constraint will be manipulating all of them. So now what we're going to do is take this left hand constraint that we've named constraint to hand and use this to constrain to the weapon. So with this selected, we're going to snap it to the weapon. Shift select to the weapon, use our snap tool. And now as it comes in, of course it's going to look funky, but it's on and near the point. And what we're going to do is reorganize this constraint to flip it upside down and then take our time to connect it safely and more of a peeling pose on the bottom of the weapon. And since we have a big stretch in our arm, we can slowly play with the chest. Rotate the chest a little bit. And also too, and we can have the shoulder controls from the body also being pushed forward in order to help sell this arm. And to have fun with it, to see what we're working with, we can kind of look at the camera to see how far we could actually push it without actually breaking it. So now taking the pivot point of the left hand, moving that down, getting the bend in. But remember, now we're using the left hand control. So let's try to manipulate the constraint on top of the gun. And we're going to take our time. And one good thing too, in order to save confusion with the IK, we're going to also put the hand controls on this layer so we don't get confused which one to touch. So being very careful with the fingers, taking your time to adjust a really good grip for this idle pose that Luna is going to have. We want to make sure that there's a nice tight grip on this weapon. And also too, what you can use to kind of help with your camera angle is hitting backslash and right click and move. And there's a little bit of gap in the thumb area there, and that's what we'll sync. Cool. Now with all that selected and looking good and tightened up, let's kind of give it a look on full screen. Yep, not too bad. What we're going to do from here is we're going to take, for the final step, we will select the left hand constraint. and we will parent it to the weapon, which will be this control right here. Shift select our left hand constraint and make sure our parent is again hit parented. So that way now, if all goes well like we need it to be, our new left hand constraint, our new left hand controller that we've made earlier is free to move around the weapon and free to keyframe as we see fit. And if everything else is working correctly too, we have mobility in our hips. Make sure we can go up and down. Camera moves correctly with it. Left and right. Our gun is moving with it. Making sure that our new hand switches, our IK hand, is manipulating with our hand as well, our other hand. If we move the gun up and down, the left hand is influenced by the weapon, moving anywhere we want it to. And that's it. This is the setup for a first-person shooter animation that we have done and utilized at Blizzard, as well as other control constraint setups. So now we will work on 3P as well, utilizing the same tactics, but putting our character in a 3P pose. And now let's just save this setup out. Okay. Now we're working on our 3P pose initially. So starting with the new scene, we're going to do the same thing for creating our reference. Bring in our AK-47. And also our 3P Luna. Awesome. So now with a full character selection, we are going to be initially posing what we had made in the concept stage before starting. But in order to get things up and running, we want to first grab our AK-47, go back to how big we had it in first person, which is about 4.7. Get this guy out in front, set our stage by adding a polyplane. That is edit to our layering. Say BG. Ultimately, what we're going to do is bring up our pose for reference. And working on this, we can pose and give a little bit more attitude to what we originally envisioned Luna to be. So working on her core, foot placement, her hips, side a little bit, jumping back into our IK uniform. Be moving from the root. So we'll have the root here and the pelvis here. That seems to be way, way better. Cool. So let us take some time and work on the pose. Trying to look to get that same feeling. We'll initially be zeroing things out. I want to move this foot pose into the front of where she's supposed to be and give a little bit more rotation in this part. And what we're going to be doing here is our same setup as before. With our locators. Shift selecting our IK, snapping it into place, expanding the locator. naming this locator. Modifying. Expanding again, duplicating this. Control, making it a child of this constraint. Taking this control, shift selecting the IK, parenting this, and now what we can do is start to move the gun into place. And one thing that I did to take the liberty off of helping my process was saving a hand pose within a library. And by doing that, I grabbed all the controls beforehand working on the 1P setup and saved the trigger pose that I made using a anim library located here. And by saving that pose from 1P, I can instantly copy that pose back to what we have here, which saves some time. And then making sure to adjust this hand pose in order to correctly align that. Looks pretty good. So what we're going to do is we're going to parent constraint this. To our gun here. And with that selected, we're going to take a look at our pose, bring back our JPEG, and really take our time when aligning this gun correctly. And as you can see, now we can really start molding in the details. Let's jump into our neck pose. Now our shoulder pose. Making sure that it's working from all angles. We want to make sure that the tilt and twist is in there. And we can make this pose as dynamic as we need to be. Great. Now last but not least, let us make a control for the new parent control that we've made. Left hand control. So that way we have some way of selecting it when we come back. And what we want to do is grab our left hand constraint, grab our weapon, snap it to the weapon, and then use our constraint the best way that we can. Now for this, we are going to be using more twist on the chest area. Looking at how we envisioned it, it's getting closer. Just need to do a small little bit more adjustments to the left hand, more of a tilt down. Feels more correct, more fluent. And what we want to do now that we have our other pose here is we want to jump into our hand pose. We want to hide all of the extra controls to make sure that we're selecting the right control objects. Let's move this one out here really quick so we can grab all the controls. Select all the hand controls. Go to our library and apply this pose. And with the constraint selected again, we're going to move back to our grip on the weapon. And this one may or may not be slightly adjusted in order to compensate for how she's holding the weapon in this new pose. But all in all, looks like we're getting a decent fit. And then from here, just make a slight adjustment to the thumb area. Meanwhile, as we remember to use our constraint in order to get that nice grip into the weapon. So it takes time, and to make sure that everything is gripped properly is all that matters. And with that selected, the last service that we have is parenting this constraint to the gun. And we'll do that by grabbing the gun, then grabbing the constraint, and parent constraining that together. And then double checking to make sure our left hand control is free to move, which it is. And our IK is able to move the weapon as well as the hand. Which it is. Awesome. And with our BG, our ground plane, I think what would help this one out a lot is instead of a flat plane, looking at it from the side, understanding where she's standing, as well as giving a volume to it. We're going to use a cube. Let's use our grid. And that is a nice block to start out our 3P animation. Just looking at it from the back, we just want to make sure our character is balanced. And there you have it. A nice scene that's set up with our character properly constrained to the weapon and starting our initial idle pose. And last but not least, we save. And name it 3P attack. And that's it for the setup.